Recent polling suggests that Republicans might risk their narrow 10-seat majority in the House if they seek to impeach the president. The most vulnerable GOP lawmakers are the 18 Republicans currently representing districts that Biden won in 2020. That includes 2 Republican congressmen here in Arizona, David Schweiker from the Fountain Hills area and Juan Ciscomani, who represents the Tucson area. Neither one of them commented today on House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's announcement to open up impeachment inquiries into President Biden. Last month, the Democratic-aligned group, the Congressional Integrity Project, commissioned a poll that found a majority of voters in the 18 swing districts we're talking about think an impeachment inquiry would be a political stunt and not a serious effort to investigate. Likewise, a majority of those voters would view an impeachment inquiry as an effort to damage Biden politically rather than as a fact-finding effort. Former Republican political consultant turned independent Chuck Coughlin explains what this could mean for the GOP next year.
This is a partisan-driven tool to try and damage the president based on, political hyperbole with, the troubles, the very deeply troubled son that he has. It's not a broad-based political support message. And what Republicans need to do right now is appeal to a broader segment of the electorate. This does not do this.
Now, predictably, the August poll breaks down along partisan lines and among supporters of the current and former presidents. That means it'll be up to the independent voters who are tipping the scales in these polls, just like they might next November. Guys, back over to you.
Dennis, thank you so much. Brand